Hey guys, back with another video. I'm a busy lady today. Mostly just catching up on videos because that last video was supposed to be uploaded yesterday. Um, Sorry about that, but now I have another one to introduce to you guys as well. In honor of World Day for Animals in Labs, um, and in solidarity with the activists that are out there on behalf of animal rights for these animals that are confined in laboratories and tested on in cruel and grotesque ways and tortured. You know, they sorry, trying to gather my thoughts. There were some rallies yesterday morning and today that I could not be a part of, but in solidarity of that, I've decided to make a video in honor of World Day for Animals in Labs. Now, why is testing on animals and, testing and vivisection on animals in labs wrong? Well, it's morally wrong and it's scientifically very flawed, and that's why. And I'm going to get into that. First off, the cruelty and waste of vivisection. Vivisection has been defined as the act of cutting into or dissecting the body of a living animal, especially for scientific research. The word is derived from the Latin vivus, for alive, and the English section, which means to cut. The term has come to mean any harmful or invasive technique used on animals in experimentation or dissection. The dictionary's definition of vivisection, however, does not begin to describe how hundreds of millions of animals are used in science every day, let alone capture the physical pain, deprivation, and emotional distress experienced by animals who are cut up, poisoned, burned, irradiated, gassed, shocked, dismembered, or genetically designed to suffer. Nor does it reflect the tragedy of each individual life, however short and brutal, caged in an artificial environment which deprives them of experiencing life as nature intended. Millions of animals, primates, dogs and cats, rats and mice, rabbits, pigs, horses, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and yes, guinea pigs, are sacrificed in basic and applied research for the safety testing of products to be bred or harvested from the wild to be killed and cut up for dissection, and as living factories for byproducts to be used as ingredients in drugs or laboratory experiments. Now, this website that I'm reading this from, National, what's NAVS? Is it National Activists Against Vivisection? Okay, National Anti-Vivisection Society. National Anti-Vivisection Society opposes the use of animals in scientific research and product testing for both ethical and scientific reasons. Vivisection is cruel. It is an outdated and inadequate methodology that can produce invalid, often misleading results. It wastes money and reduces and resources and sidetracks meaningful scientific progress. The use of animals for scientific purposes has been debated for centuries, and seemingly pitting the pursuit of knowledge and human health against compassion for animals. Society has allowed vivisection because people have been convinced that it isn't a, quote, necessary evil, and the only way to find cures for human diseases and to make drugs, cosmetics, and other products safe. Secrecy and security have ensured that people are unaware of what happens behind the laboratory doors or wrongly trust that the laws intended to prohibit cruelty to animals include protection for animals used in research. Defenders of animal experimentation argue that non-human animals are enough like humans to make them scientifically adequate models of human diseases, or to test treatments or the safety of products. And yet they also contend that other species are different enough from people to make it ethically acceptable to use them in experiments. Was it National Anti-Vivisection Society argues that it is the way that humans and non-human animals are similar that provides the basis for the ethical objection to vivisection. Perhaps the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham said it best when he asked, "The question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer?" There is little doubt that some breakthroughs in the past were made by experimenting on animals, but the questions being asked of science today are more complex, and society has grown in its respect and appreciation for other sentient beings, due in large part to studies of their behavior and intelligence. Sophisticated technologies available today and under development promise new and better avenues for investigation. Many of these approaches offer human relevance and insight in ways that animal models have not and cannot provide. Okay, now moving on to the next article I wanted to go through against vivisection: why animal research is bad science. The government is wrong to support vivisection, and not only because of the suffering caused to non-human animals. The government is determined to ensure the expansion of animal research, arguing that investment, jobs, and medical breakthroughs depend on it. It's a view that the science minister, okay, this is coming from the United Kingdom, that's why it says science minister, Lord Sainsbury, and a coalition of powerful drug companies, including GlaxoSmithKline, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer, share, as does the Home Secretary David Blunkett. In the face of protests that have halted the construction of an Oxford laboratory where animal experiments were to take place, Blunkett is proposing new laws to crack down on, quote, animal rights extremists. He seems more concerned about the harassment of a handful of researchers than about the industrial scale infliction of pain and death on more than 2 million living, feeling animals, including 4,000 experiments on non-human primates last year. Yet some scientists doubt that vivisection can provide accurate models of human diseases and treatments at all. They point out that drug therapies can have vastly different effects on different species. Strychnine, for example, kills people, but not monkeys, and belladonna is deadly to humans, yet harmless to rabbits. We have witnessed many tragic consequences of blind faith in animal testing. The anti-rheumatic drug Oprin killed 76 people in Britain and caused serious illness to 3,500 others, despite having been declared safe after 7 years of animal research. Likewise, thousands of people with heart trouble suffered adversely after taking the animal-vetted drug Eraldin. Subsequent experimentation has failed to find a single species that reacts to Eraldin in the same way as humans do. Undeterred, the big pharmaceutical corporations have exploited public fears concerning life-threatening diseases, such as cancer and HIV, to demand more money for animal experiments and to oppose animal welfare legislation restricting their activities. The battle against HIV provides a classic example of the pitfalls of vivisection. Protease inhibitor drugs have made a major contribution to cutting the death rate, enabling many people with the virus to live a more or less normal life. HIV infection has been transformed from a death sentence into a manageable condition. The initial development of these highly effective anti-HIV therapies was, however, seriously compromised by reliance on animal testing. In one of the biggest medical scandals of recent times, there was a 4-year delay in the clinical trials of protease inhibitor treatments. This may have contributed to the needless death of tens of thousands of people worldwide. In 1989, researchers at the pharmaceutical giant Merck, Sharp, and Dom, MSD, were working on a promising protease drug. Development was going well until the scientists decided to test the new therapy on dogs and rats. They all died. According to MSD's former vice president of worldwide basic research, Bennett M. Shapiro, the company, quote, stopped development of its promising protease inhibitor. MSD presumed the drug would have the same lethal effects on humans. The result, research on potentially life-saving treatment was halted in 1989, and clinical trials of a new protease drug, Crixivan, did not start until 1993. Okay, just a second. The delay was confirmed by one of MSD's senior researchers, Emilio Emini. Writing in Washington Post magazine, the investigative reporter Stephen Fried revealed how reliance on animal data caused MSD to abandon its first protease inhibitor. Quote, "It did not take long for the drug to crash. This is not going to work," the toxicologist said when he brought Emini the news about the 8 dying dogs. The rats weren't doing any better. Merck's drug had the nasty habit of shutting off the bile flow to the liver. Emini felt that if the animal test results were that severe, it was unethical to even do the study on humans. So there went 4 years, end quote. MSD admits that animal studies were not used in the primary research that led to the invention of the follow-up protease inhibitor Crixivan. Based on the knowledge that HIV is a uniquely human disease, MSD scientists focused on studying the structure of HIV and its interaction with human cells. Designed on computers, the protease drug was safety tested using non-animal methods. According to Shapiro, animal tests were neither needed nor used to explore the ability of protease inhibitors to block the growth of the AIDS virus. The target action was already well understood and could be evaluated before the clinical trials using computers, cell culture, and biochemical assays. This looks like a tacit admission that animal studies were not scientifically necessary for the development of protease drugs, and that for the primary research, non-animal methods were able to provide reliable data. It was only when MSD decided further to test new drugs on dogs and rats that it ran into trouble. All died of liver failure. As we know, protease inhibitors do not have the same fatal consequences for humans. On the contrary, they have dramatically improved the lives of people with HIV. These setbacks in the development of anti-HIV treatments highlight the scientific flaws of animal-based medical research. Vivisection can produce data that is inapplicable to humans. Instead of backing the expansion of animal labs, John Prescott and Lord Sainsbury might help medical science more effectively by funding the development of alternatives, including cell, tissue, and organ banks for testing the toxicity of new drugs, and virtual reality supercomputers to simulate the workings of the human body and the effects of innovative therapies. A majority of the diseases we suffer are unique to our species. Cures are most likely to be found by studying the physiology of human beings, not other animals. Now, that was written by a contributor, Peter Tatchell. He's the director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, which campaigns for human rights, the UK and worldwide. His personal... Okay, yeah. It's just listing a thing for his personal biography. Okay. And this is for PETA. This is from PETA providing arguments and counter arguments here. Animal science animal testing is bad science. Point and counterpoint. Studies published in prestigious medical journals have shown time and again that animal experimentation wastes lives, both animal and human, and precious resources by trying to infect animals with diseases that they would never normally contract. Fortunately, a wealth of cutting-edge non-animal research methodologies promise a brighter future for both animal and human health. The following are common statements supporting animal experimentation, followed by the arguments against them. Okay, quote, every major medical advance is attributable to experiments on animals, end quote. This is simply not true. An article in the esteemed Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine has even evaluated this very claim and concluded that it was not supported by any evidence. Most experiments on animals are not relevant to human health. They do not contribute meaningfully to medical advances, and many are undertaken simply out of curiosity and do not even pretend to hold promise for curing illnesses. The only reason people are under the misconception that these experiments help humans is because the media, experimenters, universities, and lobbying groups exaggerate the potential that they have to lead to new cures and the role they've played in past medical advances. Quotes, if we didn't use animals, we'd have to test new drugs on people, end quote. The fact is that we already do test new drugs on people. No matter how many tests on animals are undertaken, someone will always be the first human to be tested on. And, clinical trials always do test drugs on hundreds, if not thousands, of humans before the drugs actually make it to the market. But there might be animal testing that precedes it that may or may not have any value, is what I'm trying to say. Because animal tests are so unreliable, they make those human trials all the more risky. The National Institutes of Health, NIH, has noted that 95% of all drugs that are shown to be safe and effective in animal tests fail in human trials because they don't work or are dangerous. And of the small percentage of drugs approved for human use, half end up being relabeled because of side effects that were not identified in tests on animals. Let me just take a little bit of water. We have to observe the complex interactions of cells, tissues, and organs in living animals. That's the argument, and here's a counter-argument. Taking healthy beings from a completely different species, artificially inducing a condition that they would never normally contract, keeping them in an unnatural and stressful environment, and trying to apply these results to naturally occurring diseases in human beings is dubious at best. Physiological reactions to drugs vary enormously from species to species, and even within a species. Penicillin kills guinea pigs, but is inactive in rabbits. Aspirin kills cats and causes birth defects in rats, mice, guinea pigs, dogs, and monkeys. And morphine, a depressant in humans, stimulates goats, cats, and horses. Further, animals in laboratories typically display behavior indicating extreme psychological distress. And experimenters acknowledge that the use of these stressed out animals jeopardizes the validity of the data produced. Quote, animals help in the fight against cancer, end quote. Through taxes, donations, and private funding, animals have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on cancer research since 1971. However, the return on that investment has been dismal. A survey of 4,451 experimental cancer drugs developed between 2003 and 2011 found that more than 93% failed after entering the first phase of human clinical trials, even though all had been tested successfully on animals. The authors of the study pointed out that animal, quote, models of human cancer created through techniques such as grafting human tumors onto mice can be poor predictors of how a drug will work in humans. Quote, science has a responsibility to use animals to keep looking for cures for all the horrible diseases that people suffer from. End quote. Every year in the U.S., animal experimentation gobbles up billions of dollars, including 40% of all research funding from the National Institutes of Health. And nearly $3 trillion is spent on healthcare. While funding for animal experimentation and the number of animals used in experiments continues to increase, the U.S. still ranks 42nd in the world in life expectancy and has a high infant mortality rate compared to other developed countries. Now, I would argue that's more of a systemic failure problem and more of a problem with the the healthcare system and all of that, as opposed to blaming it all on the animal testing. While that is an element of it, it's not the prevailing factor in this. But anyways, a 2014 review paper co-authored by a Yale School of Medicine professor in the prestigious medical journal, the BMJ, documented the overwhelming failure of experiments on animals to improve human health. It concluded that if research conducted on animals continues to be unable to reasonably predict what can be expected in humans, the public's continuing endorsement and funding of preclinical animal research seems misplaced. End quote. Quote, many experiments are not painful to animals and are therefore justified. End quote. The U.S. law that governs the use of animals in laboratories, the Animal Welfare Act, AWA, allows animals to be burned, shocked, poisoned, isolated, starved, forcibly restrained, addicted to drugs, and brain damaged. No experiment, no matter how painful or trivial, is prohibited, and painkillers are not even required. Even when alternatives to the use of animals are available, U.S. law does not require that they be used, and they often aren't. Because the AWA specifically excludes rats, mice, birds, and cold-blooded animals, more than 95% of the animals used in laboratories are not even covered by the minimal protection provided by federal laws. Because they are not protected, experimenters don't even have to provide them with pain relief. Between 2010 and 2014, nearly 500,000 animals, excluding mice, rats, birds, cold-blooded animals, were subjected to painful experiments and not provided with pain relief. A 2009 survey by researchers at Newcastle University found that mice and rats who underwent painful, invasive procedures such as skull surgeries, burn experiments, and spinal surgeries were provided with post-procedural pain relief only about 20% of the time. Now I'm going to pause it and make a part 2 to this video because I'm running out of space and time. I'm going to include the link to that below. Alright, bye for now, guys. Bye.